The words hung in the air like a confession, like a father finally admitting his son had surpassed him. Of course, he can achieve my level of success. His career seems to be on a trajectory towards something extraordinary. Rafael Nadal's voice carried weight that only 22 Grand Slam titles can bring. But this wasn't just another interview. This was the passing of a torch from the king of clay to the prince of all surfaces. Picture this moment. The greatest Spanish tennis player of all time, standing before cameras, choosing his words carefully, knowing that everything he says about Carlos Alcaraz will echo through tennis history forever. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. This isn't just about tennis. This is about legacy, about mentorship, about watching someone you've inspired grow beyond even your wildest dreams. Let me take you back to where it all began. Lorca, 2001. A 15-year-old Rafael Nadal steps onto his first professional tennis court. His uncle Tony watches from the sidelines, clipboard in hand, knowing he's witnessing the birth of something special. But even Tony couldn't have predicted what would happen next. Fast forward to 2003 in Murcia, Spain. A baby named Carlos Alcaraz takes his first breath. While infant Carlos sleeps peacefully in his crib, teenage Rafa is already making waves on the ATP Tour. The universe, it seems, had a plan. The parallels are almost too perfect to be real. Both Spanish, both left-handed initially before Carlos switched. Both possessing that rare combination of power and finesse that turns clay courts into personal kingdoms. But here's where the story gets emotional. Young Carlos didn't just watch Nadal on television like millions of other kids. He studied him, obsessed over him. When other children his age were playing video games, Carlos was practicing his forehand, trying to mimic that iconic topspin that made Rafa untouchable on clay. Carlos's father, Carlos Sr., tells a story that still gives him chills. When Carlos was 8 years old, he told me he wanted to play tennis like Rafa. Not just play tennis, play like Rafa. The determination in his eyes, it was like he could see his future. The tennis academy in Villena became Carlos's second home. Every morning at 6 a.m., while most kids were still dreaming, Carlos was on court. His coach, Juan Carlos Ferrero, yes, the former world #1, saw something that made his hands shake with excitement. This boy, he has Rafa's intensity, but with something extra. Ferrero whispered to colleagues. He plays like the court owes him money. Meanwhile, Rafa was collecting Grand Slams like trophies on a shelf. French Open after French Open, Wimbledon, US Open, Australian Open, each victory cementing his place in tennis immortality. But legends, as we know, don't last forever. The injuries started creeping in. That famous left knee that carried Rafa through countless 5-set battles began betraying him. The warrior who never gave up was finally facing an enemy he couldn't defeat. Enter Carlos Alcaraz at 15, rail-thin, baby-faced, looking like he should be worrying about homework instead of backhands. His first ATP match came in 2020, a qualifier event. Most people didn't even know how to pronounce his name correctly. But those who watched, those who really watched, saw something that made them lean forward in their seats. The kid wasn't just talented. He was fearless. Remember his first meeting with Rafa? Madrid 2022. The student facing the master. The entire tennis world held its breath. This wasn't just a match. This was a changing of the guard moment, disguised as a second-round encounter. Carlos didn't just beat Nadal that day. He dismantled him. Made the king of clay look human, vulnerable, mortal. But here's the beautiful part of this story. Instead of resentment, instead of feeling threatened, Rafa felt something else entirely. Pride, the kind of pride Ah. Teacher feels when their student graduates summa cum laude, watching Carlos play. Rafa confided to close friends, "It's like watching myself, but better." The 2022 U.S. Open changed everything. Carlos, just 19 years old, battling through the draw like a man possessed. Each match more dramatic than the last. The entire tennis world watched as this Spanish teenager refused to lose. When he lifted that trophy, when he became the youngest men's world #1 since the computer rankings began. Something shifted in the tennis universe. Rafa watched from his home in Mallorca. Tears in his eyes. Not tears of sadness, tears of fulfillment. His life's work, his dedication to Spanish tennis was bearing fruit beyond his wildest dreams. The torch wasn't being stolen. It was being passed voluntarily, gracefully, beautifully. Fast forward to 2023. Carlos wins Wimbledon. Not just wins it. Dominates it. Takes down Novak Djokovic in a final that will be talked about for generations. The same Djokovic who had tormented Rafa for years. Rafa's text message to Carlos that night was simple. "Now you understand what this feeling means. Enjoy every second." But the real magic happened behind the scenes. Training sessions in Mallorca. Rafa opening his private courts to Carlos. Not as competitors, as family. The older brother teaching the younger brother secrets that can't be learned from textbooks. How do you handle the pressure? Carlos asked during one of these sessions. Rafa's answer was pure poetry. "You don't handle pressure, Carlos. You dance with it. You make it your partner instead of your enemy." The 2024 French Open became Carlos's breakthrough on clay. Rafa's domain. The place where the master had ruled for nearly 2 decades. Watching Carlos lift the trophy at Roland Garros. It was like watching a son follow in his father's footsteps. But then came the announcement that shook the tennis world. November 2024. Rafa's retirement. The warrior who had given everything to the sport was finally laying down his racket. The emotions were overwhelming. Press conferences filled with tears, tributes from around the world, and Carlos felt the weight of an entire nation's expectations settling on his 21-year-old shoulders. "I'm not trying to be the next Rafa," he said in a quiet moment with Spanish media. "I'm trying to be the first Carlos," but the comparisons wouldn't stop. They never do when greatness meets greatness. Then came 2025. Carlos started the year with a mission. Australian Open quarterfinals. Good, but not great. The critics started whispering. Maybe he's not ready. Maybe the pressure is too much. Carlos responded the only way he knew how. By winning. Barcelona, his first title of the season. The same tournament where Rafa had won 12 times. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Then Roland Garros, again. It was a match for the ages, Rafa said about Carlos's final victory. "I'm very happy for Carlos. It was a spectacular final, very exciting." The U.S. Open followed. Another title. Another statement. Carlos wasn't just winning, he was dominating the way only true champions can. And that's when Rafa made his definitive statement. "I hope he enjoys a long career." But much like in my case, injuries could play a role. However, let's focus on him and not compare. Those words, let's focus on him and not compare. They carry the wisdom of someone who understands legacy. Someone who knows that greatness isn't about replacing what came before, it's about building something new on that foundation. But here's what Rafa isn't saying publicly. Here's the part of the story that only those closest to both players know. The private conversations. The midnight phone calls when Carlos doubts himself. The way Rafa still watches every single one of Carlos's matches, not as a former rival, but as a mentor. A guardian angel in tennis shoes. "People ask me if I'm jealous of Carlos," Rafa confided to a close friend recently. How can you be jealous of your own legacy? He is my legacy. Everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed, it was so players like Carlos could exist. The truth is, Carlos carries something of Rafa in every match. That never give up attitude. That respect for opponents. That understanding that tennis is just a game. But the way you play it defines who you are as a person. When Carlos celebrates a winner, you can see Rafa's influence. When he congratulates an opponent after a tough loss, you hear Rafa's voice. When he practices with the intensity of someone who knows every point matters, you witness Rafa's ghosts on every court. But Carlos is writing his own story too. The drop shots that leave opponents stranded. The court coverage that defies physics. The mental toughness that allows him to come back from impossible situations. These aren't imitations of Rafa. These are evolution. This is what happens when talent meets inspiration meets opportunity. The Spanish Tennis Federation has a photo in their headquarters. Rafa, at 19, holding his first French Open trophy. Right next to it, Carlos, at 19, holding his first US Open trophy. Past and future in perfect harmony. But the story isn't over. It's just beginning. Carlos is 22 years old. He has already won 4 Grand Slams. He's already been world number 1. He's already defeated every great player of this generation. But according to Rafa, we haven't seen anything yet. His career seems to be on a trajectory towards something extraordinary. Extraordinary. Coming from a man who defined extraordinary for 2 decades. That word carries weight. The numbers support Rafa's confidence. Carlos has won more Grand Slams by age 22 than any player except Rafa himself and 3 other legends. His head-to-head record against top 10 players is remarkable. His ability to perform under pressure is already legendary. But it's not just about statistics. It's about something deeper when you watch Carlos play. You see someone who understands the responsibility that comes with greatness. The way he interacts with ball kids. The respect he shows to opponents. The time he takes with fans. These aren't accidents. These are lessons learned from watching Rafa handle fame with grace and dignity. The passing of the torch hasn't been dramatic. There was no ceremonial moment. No formal announcement. It's been happening gradually, naturally, beautifully. Every time Carlos steps on court wearing Spanish colors. Every time he celebrates a victory with humility. Every time he loses with dignity and promises to come back stronger. The torch burns a little brighter. Rafa's statement isn't just about tennis potential. It's about recognizing that Carlos possesses something even rarer than talent. Character. The kind of character that turns talented players into champions and champions into legends. The injuries Rafa mentioned, they're real. They're coming. Every tennis player faces them eventually. But Carlos has something Rafa didn't have at 22, the roadmap of someone who navigated those challenges successfully. When your body starts betraying you. Rafa told Carlos during one of their private conversations. Remember that champions aren't made when everything goes right. Champions are made when everything goes wrong and they find a way anyway. The ATP circuit is taking notice too. Tournament directors scrambled to get Carlos in their draws. Television ratings spike whenever he plays. Sponsorship deals that break records. The business of tennis revolves around stars, and Carlos isn't just a star, he's a supernova. But success brings pressure, expectations, the weight of an entire sport looking to you as their future. Carlos handles it with the wisdom of someone much older. I don't play for records, he said recently. I play because I love competing. The records, they're just consequences of doing what I love at the highest level possible. That philosophy, that approach, it's pure Rafa. The student has become the teacher. not just for young Spanish players, but for the entire next generation of tennis talent. Players around the world study Carlos the way Carlos once studied Rafa. The cycle continues. Madrid 2025. The same tournament where Carlos first defeated Rafa 3 years earlier. Carlos is warming up for his match when he spots a familiar figure in the stands. Rafa, wearing sunglasses, trying to watch unnoticed. Their eyes meet across the court. Carlos nods. Rafa nods back. No words needed. The torch has been passed. The kingdom has a new king. And the old king couldn't be prouder. After Carlos wins the tournament, his 7th Masters title, he's asked about seeing Rafa in the stands. Having him there, it's like having your hero believe in you. Not just believe you can win. Believe you can carry on something bigger than yourself. That's the real story here. This isn't just about one player replacing another. This is about legacy. About responsibility. About understanding that greatness isn't just about what you accomplish. It's about what you inspire others to accomplish after you're gone. Rafa's career achievements speak for themselves. 22 Grand Slams, 14 French Opens, over 1,000 professional wins. But his greatest achievement might be Carlos Alcaraz. Not because he coached him. Not because he discovered him. But because he showed him what was possible. What greatness looked like. How champions carried themselves. How legends were born. Carlos's trajectory isn't just extraordinary because of his talent. It's extraordinary because he's building on the foundation Rafa laid. Taking Spanish tennis to heights even Rafa couldn't have imagined. The next chapter of this story is being written right now. Every match Carlos plays. Every tournament he wins. Every young player who watches him and thinks if Carlos can do it, maybe I can too. The torch has been passed. But the flame burns brighter than ever. And somewhere in Mallorca, the greatest Spanish tennis player of all time watches with satisfaction, knowing that his life's work will continue long after. His final match point, the king, is dead. Long live the king. What do you think about this incredible mentorship story? Have you witnessed this kind of graceful passing of greatness in other sports? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Luminoir for more untold stories from the world of sports and beyond.